Good morning. Matthew 13 today. Going through the sermons as the big sermons as Matthew has put them together in his gospel. And I want to talk about, I've been talking about back to basics. And today I want to talk about the basics of spiritual receptiveness. Just being receptive to what God is up to receive the kingdom. Jesus says in Matthew 13, I thought I had it marked, but I've got 15 things marked. He says in chapter 13, 1, well, Matthew says, that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake, and such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, and while all the people stood on the shore. And then he said to them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. And some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil, and it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up and the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. Let him hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? And he replied, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables, though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. Then in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused, and they hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Jesus says, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been revealed to you. You, disciples, but not to the crowds at large. The reason he's teaching in parables, Jesus says in verse 13, is to be found in the wisdom of Isaiah, who taught in such a way that those who were hard of heart in his day, that they would not understand. Isaiah 6:9, go tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. The previous chapter of Isaiah, Isaiah 5, is a song about God's vineyard. And we learn that God's vineyard, God's temple garden, that symbolized the whole nation of Israel, had been poorly tended by its farmers. God had done all kinds of things. He'd graced that field. God had even taken all the rocky places out of it and taken the rocks out of the soil and had graced the thing with great fertility. But because of the way the farmer was defiling the whole place, the field was not producing a good crop. The temple cult, we get cult from cultivation, right? It's the same word. The priests weren't cultivating the temple field with any kind of fruitfulness. And therefore, what was going to happen to the temple and the temple compound? Its hedge of protection, Isaiah says. That hedge, that wall that encases the compound, that force field of holiness which separated it from all the rest of common creation, that's going to be pushed down. And guess what? The rocks are going to be trampled back into the soil, and there'll be trampled places, right? And Isaiah says, there's going to be places in this field now that are just covered with briars and thorns. And it won't rain. The fertility and the life-giving power of the rain won't come, and the sun will come down and just kind of parch the place. You get the picture. Isaiah 5 and 6 is what Jesus is working out of when he tells the parable of the sower. He lifts all of the images for the parable of the sower out of Isaiah 5. Okay? Isaiah's Song of the Vineyard is a judgment on the temple and the nation of Isaiah's day. And this is the passage from which Jesus lifts all these images. And now Jesus is renewing the story of the national field. He's renewing the story of a field that has been decimated by exile, right? A temple cult that is not cultivating good fruit anymore. And the Spirit of God the Shekinah glory of God never comes back to the second temple, right? Not visibly, at least, in the way it did for King Solomon. And Jesus comes and he tells the story of the farmer, the cultivator, sowing seed into this decimated temple field, the temple garden again. He's come to renew the kingdom. He's come to renew the temple in himself, yes? And he starts to re-sow the field, that place where heaven and earth meet. But there are trampled places now. Right? There are places in this field that Jesus is trying to rebuild that are so hard that the seed can't penetrate it. And the sparrows or whatever come and eat the seed before it gets a chance to germinate. Of course, Jesus is talking about a new kind of temple too, isn't he? A temple built into human hearts, a temple built into a community that he's trying to coalesce around and in himself. And it is the case now that this temple has been defiled that there's rocky places all through it, right? And the seed falls in the rocky place, and what happens? The heart, the soil that's addicted to comfort, right, just can't stand the fact, the seed of the kingdom, though it may sprout early on may sound like a great deal, but when the sun comes and it just dries up, the plant just wilts because there's no depth to the spirituality. The spirituality is not about God. It's not about doing the will of God. It's not about loving the neighbor. It's not about rebuilding the compound. It's about me. And when it's not all about me, and I feel bad, and I get, really down, I just let the faith wilt. And then there are, of course, the places that Isaiah says that are the briary places, the places where the weeds have just gotten so completely out of control that you can't plant anything in there without the shade, and the weeds just choke the soil of all of its nutrients, right? Doesn't get the real seed of the kingdom, can't see the light of day because you're so busy running after money that you can't make a relationship. You're so busy and worried about many things that you can't really commit to the things that matter. And that the urgencies of the day-to-day living, right, just kind of choke out what's finally most important in life. But then Jesus says, the seed of the kingdom, the seed of this new temple compound that I'm sowing again, it when it hits fertile soil, yeah, when the heart is receptive, you get a harvest 100 times what was sown. So much righteousness comes about because of that, and the temple field is renewed. The old images from Isaiah are made new in Jesus' ministry of rebuilding a different kind of temple compound, a different kind of field, and a different bunch of priestly workers. A different kind of soil, yes? Then Jesus told them another parable, verse 24. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. Now, I'm just imagine, just imagine some neighbor being so mad at, say, my dad after he had just spent all that money and time and sowed corn in the 15-acre field. And some neighbor being so mad at him, he went and bought a bunch of Johnson grass and sowed Johnson grass right in the middle of the cornfield. You know what Johnson grass looks like, don't you? Well, Johnson's grass, when it grows, it looks exactly like corn. I would challenge you, most of you who are inexperienced of this, to ever be able to tell Johnson grass for corn until it tassels. The tassel of Johnson grass is different. And Jesus tells this story like this. This is the agricultural image. While he was sleeping, the enemy came in and sowed weeds, that is, false seeds, zizzonia, right, among the wheat. False plants, and went away. And when the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared, right? When they form the head, that's when you can begin to tell the difference. And the owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field?" Church, Sometimes the field of the kingdom is mixed with good and bad seed, isn't it? Sometimes there are people with great motives who are wonderful people, great servants who do stupid, dumb, and harmful, even wicked things. Yes? And sometimes there are people who are just basically wicked and have bad motives who end up doing, for a whole variety of reasons, good things. And it's a mess. Look. An enemy did this, verse 28, Jesus said. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling up the weeds, right, you may root up the wheat with them." You don't plant wheat in rows, or you didn't used to, like corn, right? The root systems, by the time they're big plants, and you can tell the difference between the false wheat and the wheat. The root systems are intertwined. And you go pulling up one, guess what? So many times it hurts the good fruit, the good wheat, to root up the one, right? And we're just not able to tell the difference of which is which sometimes. And even when we think we know we've got the right bad plant, right? And we grab too quickly, and I got astigmatism, you know. I might end up with the wrong plant, and I pull up, ooh, what do I got? I've got real wheat. "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." The world is a great place and a terrible place, isn't it? And it turns out that even the kingdom of God can have a kind of mixed character. I fear sometimes even in the church, even in my own heart, there's a kind of mixed character. But that doesn't mean that the kingdom isn't real. Are you with me? An enemy did this. Are you hearing it? So many times, how many times have we heard, well, these people are just, they're hypocrites? How many times have you heard it? If you talk with people who are not receptive or kind of on the fence, I mean, it's a big deal, because the church is hurting people all over the place. Yeah? Yeah? But that doesn't mean that the kingdom of God is not real, because an enemy sows Johnson grass in the cornfield. It doesn't mean that the temple court and that the temple compound is not real. It just means some things are above our pay grade, and some things are not going to get sorted out until Jesus comes. Yeah. He's got deputized angels who know how to sort the folks out. And when the time comes, right? When the harvest time is not coming on, but the harvest time comes on, then God's got it sorted out. Yeah. And to receive the kingdom is to receive a kingdom where we just have to accept that for now, things may have a mixed character to them. But that doesn't mean the truth of the kingdom isn't real. And in verse 31, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. Yeah. Remember, Jesus is replanting the temple garden. He's rebuilding the kingdom. He's rebuilding the temple in himself. And in the Old Testament, there's a parable. The Old Testament background of this parable is in Ezekiel 17, where it is prophesied that when Israel and its temple was restored, God would take the top out of Babylon's national tree and plant it in the courts of the Lord so that the birds would shelter in the cedars of Lebanon planted in the courts of God. Yeah. Big cedar trees, the biggest of the trees, the most fertile and long-lasting of the plant kind of creation, and the birds of the air would all find their little nesting places in them, and creation would be symbolized in a vibrant way. It's not just a symbol of the garden, but the garden is a symbol of all of the nation. Right? But Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to rebuild the temple compound, and what does he do? Does he chop one of the trees down out off the 7 hills of Rome and bring it back to Jerusalem and plant it? No, he's messing around with mustard seeds. The tiniest little seed. You get it? You can't get the new story without having first gotten the old story. But when you get the old story and you know that the cedars of Lebanon are planted in the courts of God and the birds of the air nest in them, right? Then you get how strange and revolutionary Jesus' point is that when he rebuilds the temple compound, he's going to do it by planting a mustard seed. Yes. We live in a culture that likes bigger, badder, newer. I mean, when we were going to the weight room before practice, we used to say, bigger, stronger, faster. Bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah? And Jesus plants the mustard seed, and he says, smaller, slower, imperceptible, mysterious, and you're not in charge of anything. But you know what? That slow growth, that mysterious, imperceptible growth, that tiny little mustard seed that is planted, it will grow big. You know? Just imagine a stork coming in. Even after that big mustard bush gets grown. You know, a stork planting on the mustard bush. What's it do? There's the branch. The kingdom of God is like that. One of the hardest things about receiving the kingdom is accepting that the work can be so small and slow and insignificant and secret, attracting little attention. But it is sure and steady. We might not ever see the results, right, of planting a mustard seed or receiving a mustard seed into our soil. But Jesus assures us, with the faith the size of a mustard seed, great things will happen. We might not see them. We might not see the end of slavery in Europe. But when the church ordained a slave elder, the seed that put human servitude and slavery to extinction in Europe for the first time in recorded human history, that seed had the extinction of slavery in it. Encrypted in the genetic code of that seed, right, is already the mustard plant. And when the Corinthian women spoke prophetically in the church, they probably couldn't conceive that within a few generations that the entire Roman world would stop just basically selling 12-year-old girls all over the place and marrying them off without their consent. But the mustard plant was already stored in the tiny thing, right? When the church started valuing women. And so receiving the kingdom requires an openness to that which is slow and imperceptible. And then he told him still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into a large amount of flour until it worked all through the dough. The woman, listen, the Greek word is encrypted. We get encryption today from this word, right? You computer people know what encryption is. I don't really know. It's a form of hiding something. For security reasons, yeah? The woman encrypted a small amount of yeast, and that yeast, the encryption, right, hidden, spreads through the whole thing. And so Jesus is saying, I'm really telling you that the end of all things will be set right when all the discarded will reign in power, when all the little will be valued, when all the bodies will be whole. Somehow that future is already encrypted in this renewal of the kingdom and the temple function. Into the dough with the slightest little thing that we can do in faith, right? The kingdom comes. As I look out in these pews this morning, and this morning I confess I'm grieved because there's a lot of empty pews. But as I look out and see the faces here today, I've been here a long time now, and I remember the little things that we did, right? Aaron Lester sat back there in that back pew, not too far from Stephen, the backslider. And I just went back there the very first day he was here, and I said, "You come and help me. Come help me. I got a project for you." It was probably a stupid and audacious little thing. Right there's what came of it. Didn't have anything to do with you, me, or Aaron. It's something about the seed of the kingdom growing in this slow and mysterious small way. Huh? I got a similar story for most of you. And then he says in verse 44, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, went and sold all he had and bought that field. Now, by this time, it may not surprise you that I'm going to tell you that the word for treasure is temple treasure. It only means temple treasure. Right? A thesaurus only goes into a thesaurus. You didn't know that when you looked up something in a thesaurus, you were looking up into a temple treasury, a repository of many things, yes? But a thesaurus is a temple room of a treasury. Now, who hides, right? Who hides such a temple treasury, listen, in a field? Who does that? Yeah. The people who are afraid that the conquerors are coming and they're going to take all their money. So you go out, and when Sherman is on the march, all the ladies of the South took their treasures and they went out in their garden and they buried them in their garden. But Sherman's men got wise. And they went out to their garden and started digging around. Yeah? You hide the treasury when a new king is threatening to change the regime, when a conquering leader is on his way. And so the situation that Jesus envisions in this parable is very much like the situation the Babylonians were in when Cyrus was coming. And it turns out that in Isaiah 45 and verse 3, God promises Cyrus the Persian, who is about to conquer Babylon, I will give you what? The temple treasuries, the thesaurus, the treasures of darkness, the riches of the Babylonians, which they had stored in secret. Now, who would be treasure hunting in somebody else's field? Jesus asks us to imagine that in the renewed kingdom, God's Messiah will give a faithful servant the secrets to the hidden riches of the kingdom. And so this representative of the kingdom is snooping around in somebody else's field, finds the treasures of paradise, reburies them, and then goes and sells everything he's got in order to buy that field. Yeah? To receive the kingdom means you have to sell everything else in order to get it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like, verses 45 and 46, is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. And when he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. And the only other time, church, that I know of where the Scripture speaks of one great pearl is what? It's the gates of Jerusalem. The gates of the New Jerusalem are built with one single mind-boggling pearl, right? Jesus asks us to imagine a merchant who by grace is shown the very gate of heaven, all the riches of the kingdom, and he sells everything he has in order to possess that one pearl. We live in a smorgasbord world that's always hedging its bets, that doesn't commit to one party because there might be another party that comes along, right, that we might like better. And Jesus says to receive the kingdom is to say, no, I'm all in on this one. And then in the finale, Jesus reminds us, verse 47 through 50, he reminds us that there will be judgment about all of this. Look, once again, he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. And when it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore, and then they sat down and they collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. And this is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In Ezekiel 47, verse 9 and 10, Ezekiel says that when the temple is renewed in Israel, a new river of life would flow throughout the land so that everything would be alive and vibrant again. And he says, fishermen will stand along the shore from En-Gedi to Galiam, and there will be places for spreading drag nets. The fish will be all kinds. In Ezekiel 32 and verse 3, God's dragnet collects Pharaoh so that in succeeding verses, Pharaoh is thrown up on the bank like an old carp fish that you don't want to throw back into the river. And the birds of the air come and variously consume Pharaoh. Jesus tells us that at the end of this age, at the dawn of the age to come, this discriminating power of the kingdom will prevail. The righteous will be gathered by the angels into a land of abundance, right? Into a temple storehouse. But the wicked will be thrown into a furnace which utterly consumes them, even as Psalm 112 says, the wicked will gnash their teeth and waste away. So as we kind of sum up this morning, I want to say this. Receiving the kingdom in the parable of the sower involves an open heart that can receive something from the outside. That the wall around that we sometimes put around us so that people can't get in and nothing can get in and hurt us, right? If nothing can get in and hurt you, nothing can get in to save you either. And that openness then means that our temporary comfort can't be more important to us than eternal life. And our temporary security and love of money can't be allowed to choke out this kind of receptiveness. The parable of the weeds instructs us that while receiving the kingdom requires us to keep God's standards, we must wait for God to sort out the problems of this world. The parable of the mustard seed and the yeast remind us that in order to receive the kingdom, we must not despise the small, seemingly insignificant work that God puts us up to. The parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl remind us that the reception of the kingdom is something that requires an all-in kind of commitment, a willingness to subordinate everything else in order to receive what is truly rich. And receptivity means that we live our lives in constant awareness that God has a cosmic dragnet in which He will be an effective judge and sorter out of things in the end. Yes? The whole process is lived out before God, who is our eternal judge. Jesus looks at his disciples as I look at you today, and he asks, have you understood these things? I mean, really, have we understood these things? Have we really let them come in? Have we let the seed be implanted in us? Yep, they said. And then Jesus says in verse 52, therefore every scribe who has been instructed by the house Lord. Wait a minute. Did you hear it? This is the only time I know of where Jesus describes his disciples as scribes, teachers of the law in the NIV. Jesus is raising up in his disciples a new set of law clerks who would serve in the temple, right? And the scribes who would work at the renewed temple, these new priestly helpers that restaff the broken down old temple field. Jesus says to his disciples, the new scribes then, they're going to understand these parables. And he says they will be teachers who what? Who bring out of the temple storeroom new treasures as well as old. The scribes of the renewed kingdom will know that Jesus brings a new teaching by restoring the old kingdom of Israel. Hear it? Isaiah's vineyard song is supplemented by a new story of the replanting of the decimated temple garden. The tending of the ancient temple garden meant weeding the garden. Adam was supposed to weed the garden. The priests were supposed to cultivate the garden, and that meant pulling up weeds. But Jesus' story reminds us that in this world, we sometimes just have to let the weeds grow together and trust that God's got it. The same birds that nested in cedars in Israel crouch in mustard bushes in a kingdom that often encrypts its gigantic significance in little things. The kingdom leads us anew to the old treasures of darkness. Jesus brings new healing by fulfilling old promises. In other words, the scribe of the new temple will be schooled in the Spirit, but have his feet planted in the Jewish heritage. Jesus' body would become a new kind of church temple, but the new temple is filled with the same old Shekinah glory of God. In other words, Jesus' servants are rooted in the tradition, but open to new insight. Are you receptive to the kingdom? Can you see the way new insight is a fulfillment of the old? That's the person that's going to be a scribe in the kingdom. So as we close, let me tell you what openness looked like in 404 AD. The Christians Melania and Philonius both had the same dream one night in 404. This is a true story. They both simultaneously dreamed that they were being sucked in through a crack in a wall. And the more they went in, the tighter the crack became. And in the end, they realized that nothing about them was getting through this crack except their soul. everything else would have to be let go. If they were going to get through what they decided was the eye of the needle, everything else had to be sold. Bereft by the loss of their infant son and their young daughter, they believed that they were passing through Jesus' proverbial eye of the needle and required a required part, right, really, of what the rich have to do in order to be saved. Melania and Penanius belonged to the billionaire class with a palace on the Caelian hill of Rome. But they also had estates dotted across the Roman world. They had numerous islands in the Mediterranean that belonged to them. They had estates in North Africa. They had estates scattered all the way through Gaul, all the way into Roman Britain. They made more money in 6 months than 30,000 people made in a year. And Melania and Penanius decided in 404 AD that they were going to sell it all and give it to the poor and follow Jesus. Because they'd found something that was the only thing that could restore them to their baby boy and little girl. They found something more precious than all the money that the empire could provide, right? And they, I don't know how wise this was. They sold one estate, one of the first ones they sold, right? And they freed all of the slaves. They freed 8,000 slaves from their estate. You know what happened? The slaves revolted. They refused manumission. They refused to be freed. We want to stay right here where we've got a living that's secure, they demanded. And they had to go through all kinds of stuff trying to figure out how is it that the rich actually do sell everything and give to the poor. And how do they give to the poor? They end up living on one of their estates, and they just invited the poor to join them, and it ended up becoming one of the most vibrant Christian communes in the empire, where 50 families stayed, and something like 50 different single women stayed and lived collectively on this vast estate. I don't know what receptiveness to the kingdom looks like in all of our lives. But for them, it meant they found a treasure. Their heart was open. We're not going to be judgmental about all of these people that we're inviting to live with us. What I'm asking for today, what I hear Jesus asking of me and you, is to receive the kingdom. Amen? To accept the welcome into the renewed temple garden of God. To open our hearts and our soil so that it's susceptible to unseen influences of the Spirit. Resisting the temptation to be so judgmental that we don't sense that certain things just have to be put off to the judgment. Not despising the slow and the little and the unimpressive, finding the courage, at least to in principle, sell everything and get one thing. Entrusting ourselves to the one who judges mercifully, but justly and surely, and who's going to sort everything out in the end. Clinging to treasures that are old, and yet being open to the new kingdom thing that God is doing, maybe even right at this moment. Come and receive the kingdom today as we stand and sing.